Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Stress Podcast. I'm really excited to announce our next podcast guest to the show, and it's Rosie Acosta. Hi, Rosie. How are you today?
Hi. It's so nice to be here. I'm so excited to be chatting with you, Julia.
Yes, me too. I was just saying how beautiful your backdrop is with all the palm trees on the wall, and it immediately wants me to go to the beach and lay in the sunshine.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, that's the energy. I try to bring that energy anywhere I go because it's everywhere should feel like a vacation for sure.
Yes, that's true. Rosie, I always start my podcast guests off with the question, where are you located? What time is it? And what have you been up to this morning before we jumped on the podcast?
Yeah, so I'm in Los Angeles, California. It is 10:30 a.m. in the morning. I just did an Instagram live with one of my mentor teachers, and I've just been doing some computer work this morning. I have this nice little ritual routine that I kind of have my morning to do my practice and answer some emails and then just start my workday pretty much like at 8 o'clock every morning.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And what was the Instagram live about?
It was with Danielle Laporte, who's this incredible prolific writer, spiritual teacher, guru. We were talking about my book, You Are Radically Loved. We had been wanting to connect since the book came out, and it's just schedule wise, it's been really intense, but she asked some really great questions. So we just did a live, just chatting about the process and kind of how I'm dealing with everything. And so it was really fun. So if you're listening to this, you want to catch it, go to Danielle Laporte on IG and you can see the live there.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I will link it to the show notes as well. I'm sure she's probably going to save it on her reels as well.
Yeah,
on her videos. Cool. Rosie, tell us a little bit more about you. Who are you? How did you get to write a book, and how has this whole process been for you?
Yeah, so I am a yoga and meditation teacher and podcast host, and I'm a writer. I love writing. It's hard for me to even say writer. I guess I'm a published author now, right? But I grew up in LA. I'm a native Angelino. I grew up in a really chaotic area there was a lot of gang violence. It was a very, very violent time in LA history, and I grew up around a lot of trauma and just seeing really just chaotic things happen in the world. And by the time I was a teenager, I was experiencing really debilitating panic attacks, and I was getting in trouble with the law. And finally, my mom was a single parent, and she finally got to this place where she really wanted to help and ended up coming home with some meditation pamphlets from the Self-Realization Fellowship, which is like this organization founded by Paramahansa Yogananda back in the 30s. They have all these centers all over the world. There's a couple of centers in LA. The one specifically that I went to was the one in Hollywood, and that was my first foray into meditation. And that's all it took, just that one time. I got really into learning about meditation, learning about yoga, and it started to really change the course of my life. And many years later, I got really into wellness, and I decided that because it worked so well for me, I wanted to learn how to teach these practices, meditation, mindfulness, yoga, to people like the people I grew up with that had also suffered from trauma, that also were suffering from chronic illness, that were really undervaluing their health. And that's sort of where my career began. And 10 years after that, I started teaching. I was doing a blog, a health blog, and I just started to reach more people, and my podcast started to get bigger, and I started to work with Olympic athletes and celebrities and some big athletes, and everything just kind of took off, and I decided I wanted to write a book. And that process has been a long, agonizing journey. And now here we are, having this incredible conversation on the Stressed Podcast with you.
Yeah. When did you start the book writing process? When did you make that decision that you really want to write a book?
The decision was made 10 years ago. So
Okay.
the decision, the inspiration, the desire came in 10 years ago this year. So it was back in 2012. And it took after thinking about the idea, it took another 2 to 3 years until I actually wrote out a table of contents, because sometimes we get this idea and it takes us, a little bit of time to get our thoughts together and have it become this amalgamation of ideas and words that you want to create into some semblance of a thread that makes sense. So that took some time. And after that, back in 2015, I started to shop it around, and I got an agent, and I got rejected like 32 times. And so I was really at this point of wanting to give up and just obviously feeling like this wasn't going to happen for me. And I didn't, and I just kept going, and I ended up finding a new agent that was willing to like take me on as a client. And I just stayed the course. I got a writing coach, Jeannie Faulkner, who's like my writing fairy godmother, because I love to write. Just because I love to write doesn't mean I know how to write. And there's so many, the English language has so many nuances, and there is certain structural things that you need to learn to write a book. And I've not been in school or college since I was in my early 20s. So it's been a really, really long time. So I had to go back and learn some of the basics. But fortunately, I was able to work with somebody who does this for a living, which I highly recommend for anybody out there who wants to write a book or wants to start something of that nature. Is like, find yourself a coach, find yourself somebody who's already doing the thing, and see if you can work with them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So your book is called You Are Radically Loved. How did you choose that title?
I believe that part of what led me into the world of wellness, into creating a spiritual practice, was having this resonating anchor of this knowing, this internal knowing that I was radically supported, that it didn't matter what direction I went, that so long as I stayed the course, that I would be fully supported and present. And it felt very much like love. Like, it felt like this resonating conduit of energy that I had to tap into in order to move out of this feeling of being stuck. So I felt like being radically loved, as opposed to just being loved, felt so much more poignant and so much more substantial. And it felt like it really encompassed all of the things that I wanted to bring to the world. I felt like if somebody like me could get into a state of feeling fully supported, then anybody could do it.
And tell us a little bit more about that. I think that's really interesting, because I think nowadays, we hear a lot about self-love and self-care, and I think, honestly, I think we all know kind of what self-care is about at this point, but me, myself as well, I've been asking myself a lot that question around self-love, and how can you radically love yourself and feel radically loved when you are rebuilding yourself, or when you're rebuilding a life maybe that's been going in a way that you didn't expect to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people make the correlation between self-love and self-care, and I do believe that they are different things. I think that just because you can practice self-care doesn't mean that you can practice self-love. Typically, if you practice self-love, you can practice self-care. I think that it's important to be able to understand the nuances between the two. Self-love is a state of being. I don't know necessarily that it's like it is a practice that you do, but it's not necessarily like something you can check off a to-do list, especially now. I think more of it is having the awareness to recognize when you're not being loving to yourself, and having the discipline and the desire to eradicate that negative thought pattern, those negative words that might come in when you are in that moment of self-doubt or lack of self-love. You have those moments where you are self-loathing and self-deprecating yourself, to recognize, okay, hello, old friend. Like, how can I serve what is happening in this moment, or to recognize and have the compassion and the kindness to allow yourself to have that moment, but allow yourself to refocus your energy into what's going to serve your highest good. So I think it has more to do with awareness and recognition than it is checking off a list of to-dos, like taking a bath and saying words of affirmation and doing your meditation practice. It's so much more of a consistent experience that you need to guide yourself into having, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And have you been in a place in your life where you didn't love yourself, and where you had to learn that yourself, on how to identify when you're not really loving to yourself? And
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, a lot of what I talk about in the first couple of chapters, pretty much the first 4 chapters in the book, I talk about being in that state of not loving myself, or feeling like I don't understand why I have to have a relationship with myself. I didn't really value my body, my mind, my spirit. It was very much, just par for the course. It wasn't really noteworthy. I do talk about having a disordered eating, and having to grapple with dealing with PTSD and trauma, and understanding the ways in which that affects your confidence and your autonomy and your level of self-compassion. So I definitely have a little bit of experience in not being fully in a state of love of self. And I think what I say all the time is, you teach mostly what you need to learn. So I feel like in order for me to really navigate that journey, I needed to learn as much as I could about the process and about myself. And so when I found something that worked, I wanted to share it. And that's the big reason why the subtitle to the book is called A Healing Journey to Self-Love, because healing it doesn't go in a straight line. It's cyclical. And I feel like with every rung that we climb, with every step that we take, is a new opportunity for us to choose wisely and to act more kindly, especially when it comes to talking to ourselves.
Do you remember a moment or situation where you had that realization, oh, that is not really self-loving of me, and it needs to change?
Oh yeah. Oh, it happens every day. I mean, every day. I think everybody can have that can relate to that in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, I mean, I this, morning I was doing emails like I
Mhm.
said, and I
Mhm.
sent the wrong email to the wrong person, and I was, just like, ugh, like how pay attention, like that was so dumb, like why would you do something like this? Like how could you be so careless? And so I have to catch myself in those moments and just say like it's okay. Like this
Mhm.
happens. People make mistakes. Like nobody's perfect. It's okay. Send an apology email to the person saying, "Sorry, wrong, Sally. Um I meant to send this to somebody else. My apologies. Disregard."
Mhm.
And it was fine. And they responded. They're like, no worries. It wasn't even that big of a deal. I've had way bigger mistakes via email happened during like a Mercury retrograde where I reply to all and like the wrong person was on there. It's been I've had a lot of moments like that. But yes, they still happen pretty often, and I rely heavily on the tools that I have. And I remember to take deep breaths and to just relax my shoulders and release any contraction in my body, relax my jaw. I just take a moment to recenter myself and refocus and remember that it's fine. Like things are fine and nothing's that big of a deal.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love that you did exactly that example as well, because, I have a lot of people that are listening that are, working and that are really stressed out by those kind of things, right? Email and meetings and things like that. So I think to love ourselves in these moments, I think it's really powerful. You did say that there's not really like self-love is not really a practice like self-care where you have like a to-do list and you can like check the boxes of I journaled and I took a bath and I maybe went for a walk outside and I had a green juice, right? But I'm still kind of curious to learn more still about practices or strategies on how to be more self-loving. Is it more about being mindful and reminding yourself or catching yourself in the moments to
Yeah, I
remind
mean, I
yourself?
think absolutely. I mean, there's so many things that you could do. To me, I always go with having the awareness and just
Mhm.
first recognition, awareness, being aware of what is happening. And look, on the practical side, there are absolutely things you can do. I talk about the importance of movement. I talk about the importance of setting goals and being able to get from point A to point B. Like, what does that look like for you? Avoiding moments of inertia, avoiding moments of lethargy, avoiding moments where all you have is to stew in your own self-pity or victimhood or whatever it may be. Like I totally understand that. And I think for us to recognize, look, I to give ourselves the space to have those moments of like feeling sorry for yourself, like do it. I personally like to set a limit. If I'm having a bad day, I say, okay, how long do I want to have a bad day for? Do I want it to take over the first half of my morning? Then I say, okay, from right now until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I get to complain about whatever I want.
Mhm.
And then after 2 o'clock, I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to just start folding my laundry or start putting dishes away in the kitchen. Like I'm going to do something to busy myself and not think about this.
Mhm.
Sometimes I have a full day where it's just today, and I wake up in the morning and I tell my partner, I say, today is a complaining day. And he goes, okay. So he knows like today is one of those types of days. It's a complainy day. We call it a complainy day. And
Uh-huh.
I try to make it as innocuous as possible, even when I'm complaining about stuff. It's like, oh, this is going wrong. Of course it's going wrong. Of course this, of course that. So it's important to give yourself the time, but I personally recommend to give it a time stamp. Like give it a limit. Get it
Mhm.
all out. Let yourself have all the I mean, if you want to look back and say, "Oh, when so and so got the promotion 5 years ago, like that really pissed me off," whatever it may be, if that's your complaining day, let yourself have it. Most of the time I find when I have a day like that, it doesn't really last all day. It's kind of these burst moments that kind of come up. These burst moments that come up in that frequency. But then once it's out, and I'm a big fan of journaling. I'm a big fan of writing things down. I have this practice that I do every morning. I write 500 words, and I just sometimes it's stream of consciousness. I just write whatever, as much as I can, as quickly as I can. Sometimes it's a little bit more structured. And I always say that having feelings put on a page or in front of you gets them out of you. So that's a really great way of pulling out of being in that negative spin.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as what is going to remedy those feelings, again, like what I said, movement. I meditate. I'm a meditation teacher. So for me, meditation always helps.
Mm-hmm.
I love moving my body. I love working out. I love to go take a class or do something. I like to watch Netflix. So sometimes it's a Netflix binge that I just have to experience. Yeah, but those are a couple of ways.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I'm a really big believer of journaling too. My listeners know I talk about this all the time, but I think especially when I have a bad day, and when I actually woke up yesterday from a bad dream, and I started my day and I was like, oh, I'm just not feel like this dream just sat with me, and I feel like these moments are actually the hardest to sit down and write. I have both moments. Sometimes I sit down and I love to write, and I know it will really help me, and sometimes I really have to force myself to sit down and write, but it always helps. And I think it always gives me a perspective that in the moment when I haven't written down something, I couldn't see. But in that process of writing things, new thoughts come to me that give me the perspective that I need in order to feel better about myself. So I really, really love
Yeah,
journaling.
I love. Do you ever go back and reread?
No.
Oh, you don't? So what do? Do you have okay, so do you write pen to
I actually
paper?
literally have my journal laying right here because I haven't had the time this morning to journal because I talked to my mom in Germany. But yeah, it's really funny. I have a lot of friends that I talk to that do go back and read what they wrote.
Yeah.
And my mom is actually journaling too. We just talked about it this morning, and she read a little bit of what she was writing about the other day. And yeah, she goes back all the time to read, even 2 months ago or 3 months ago. I find it really difficult. I don't know.
Really?
I really write a lot. I write every day, but I have a really hard time to go back. I think also because, sometimes I think you go through different moments of your life, and yeah, I don't know. I just find it hard to go back and go see my old self.
Yeah, no, I love that. So it's almost like your way of, it's a cathartic experience of getting where your feelings, your emotions, whatever your state of mind is on paper. And then you're like, oh, that's the old me now. I can move on. Oh, really interesting. I love doing, so I have some old journals too that I have writings from when I was a teenager. I keep all of my old doodles and and so sometimes in those moments of nostalgia, I like to go back and read, or just kind of see what was going on in my life at that time. And now I do it. I still have my journal. If I'm going to journal, it's more of a personal experience. I might need to just have that kinesthetic, tactile experience of holding a pen and writing in my journal. I feel like there is a different resonating energy between that and doing my writing in the morning.
Sure.
Yeah. So I like that you do that in that way, and that you kind of get it out and put it to the side so you don't have to see it again.
Yeah. And I'm obviously very open. I'm always like, maybe one day I'll take all of my journals out and I'll read it. I have, probably 10, 15 journals full of writing. And yeah, it's really interesting. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about your book. So you were saying that the first 4 chapters, you were writing a little bit about your own personal experience, and about, how you got to where you are today. And then is it more of a self-help book? How can we imagine the book to be, and what can it help us to to learn in our
Yeah,
lives?
so the book is broken up into three parts. So the name of the book is called You Are Radically Loved. It's broken up into three parts: mind, body, and spirit. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very much structured in a way to invite the reader to basically write their own story. In the beginning, the first four chapters on the mind, there are journaling prompts. There's offerings of different practices that you can do. There's at the end of each chapter, there's like a
Mm-hmm.
takeaway bullet point. So for the people that love to skim books, and it's like, okay, what is the takeaway from these
Yeah.
chapters? So it gives you that overview of the experience of whatever the points in the specific chapter are about. I'm very into it. Is a self-help book.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like personal growth than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I do reflect on my own journey to healing, my own journey to self-love, my journey to spirituality, and it really has a foundation in uh finding your spiritual practice and having spiritual empowerment, like allowing yourself to have this experience of what does having this spiritual practice mean to you? What is being connected to your highest good mean to you? Like, what are the reasons behind what it is that you want to create in your life, and what is it strong enough to propel you forward to stay on course? And then I definitely talk about getting off course and how, like I said, healing doesn't happen in a straight line. I talk about
Mm-hmm.
relationships, as we move on in the book. The body chapter definitely refers to more movement. I talk about becoming a yoga teacher. I talk about running a marathon. I begin to describe how my body has helped and how it has hindered my
Mm-hmm.
life experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then towards the end of the book, the last four chapters, spirit, I go into a little bit deeper topics, like talking about grief and loss, and talking about hope, and really going into what it means to be radically loved. So the entire book is an invitation to create a radically loved life.
Mm-hmm. I'm very curious. How has your body hindered you to live your life experience?
I think that the hindering comes in the form of just having trauma in my body, just having had the experience of growing up in a chaotic environment, and having lived through several drive-by shootings and seeing people be physically assaulted, just having that body recognition of fear, and being in that central nervous system state, that hypervigilant state, I think has hindered me in many ways, because there are certain triggers that I have. And even now, there's just it's like what Dr. Vessel van der Kolk talks about in The Body Keeps Score. If you've not read it, it's an incredible book, but
Mm-hmm.
it is, memories live in the body, trauma lives in the body. And if you don't know the tools, or the different ways into which you can find peace and rest and freedom, it becomes really difficult to live with. So the hindrance for me personally, in the book, I talk about how I didn't understand how to express feelings and emotions. So they came out in other ways. They came out in obsessively becoming a workaholic, or having bulimia, or being able to use my body as a way of controlling my external world, as opposed to um, using my body as a conduit to express what was stuck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's super powerful. I have my own yoga practice. I have 400 hours of yoga teacher training as well, and I think it's just powerful because I think I didn't really grow up with that knowledge of, like, things are held in the body, or
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't
trauma is
either.
held, and
Mhm.
memories, right? And I actually, again, just yesterday evening, I went to a yoga class here, in my hometown, and I was like, wow, oh, this felt so good. And I've been probably holding on to these, like a couple of different things that's been happening over the past few months of my life. And yeah, it's always powerful to see how we just holding on to things and how we can actually release it when we're bringing mindfulness and awareness into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And that's great. I love that you have a practice. And
Mm,
I
yeah.
know that feeling too. I mean, now here, everything's finally opened up, and with
Mm,
Los Angeles has lifted the mask mandate for a couple of weeks now. And I just started going back to classes, like, and it, oh man, the minute I go
it's
into a
so good.
studio, it's such a different experience, you know? I
Yeah,
mean, I
it is.
loved, don't get me wrong, I loved practicing at home. I loved seeing my teachers on Zoom. Like, it's been
Mhm,
really nice. Excuse me. It's been really nice to practice with teachers that normally I wouldn't be able to practice with, right?
mhm. Yeah,
But the minute you walk into that studio space with other people there, it just changes the
totally.
dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe so too. I walked into the studio last night, and there were like 3 or 4 people. I live in Lake Tahoe. It's a small community, and I walked into the studio, and there were like 3 or 4 people from my community, and everyone was like, "Oh, hi!" It's just, yeah, so different than opening my laptop and doing some some
Yeah.
YouTube videos or something, and then
Yeah.
I just get distracted. And I thought about that yesterday too, because I was like, it's nothing that I don't know how to do on my own, but the experience of sharing this with other people, and being really fully present instead of having my phone next to me, and maybe my dog that's trying to play with me while I'm
Yeah.
trying to stretch, is so different and so much more meaningful. So I really
Yeah.
love to take that time. um I was reading through a couple of really powerful questions that came in with regards to our interview, and one of them that I found really resonating with me was how I'm just going to read it because I think it's just really powerful. Just the way it's been written. How can you cultivate love and kindness for the people in your life who aren't on board with your growth without letting them throw you off track? And I think, as we are in this personal growth and development journey, we oftentimes talk about you are the 5 people you surround yourself with. But,
Hmm.
oftentimes we hear, yeah, but it's my family, or it's my mother, or it's my dad, or it's my sister that's really difficult, or that doesn't share the same beliefs. How have you navigated that in your life, and what would you recommend people to think about as they are maybe going through this process of finding themselves and healing themselves,
Yeah.
and still have people around them that might be maybe not on the same path?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is stemmed from having compassion
Mhm,
and being able to see your loved ones from a state of full acceptance of whatever is, whether it's acceptance of the fact that you will disagree forever, or acceptance that they're doing their best, or the acceptance
mhm,
that you're doing your best. I talk about it in the chapter of radical honesty, and then the following chapter after that. Um, for us to really fully feel supported, we have to know what it's like to fully support another person. I talk
mhm,
about the importance of having relationships in our lives and how that is the highest form of a spiritual practice, because it really teaches us about ourselves. It teaches us about other people, and we want the other to fully accept us, all of everything that we are, fully as we are. Yet we don't fully accept other people fully as they are. So there is a paradigm there that we need to move through or clear. And it's easy for us to point out the flaws of others and the differences in others, how they don't believe the same thing, or they have different politics or whatever. And we're so quick to throw away people in our lives that seemingly would be great people to have, um, in terms of, especially when it comes to family, I guess I'm specifically talking about that. I mean, there's sometimes like family, you can't
You don't
change
choose
your
it. Yeah,
family, you
exactly.
know,
Yeah.
and you can't choose your family. Your family's there because that's who you were karmatically destined to come in to be in a relationship with. And so use it as a learning moment, use it as your teacher. These are very powerful people in our lives that we can choose to evolve with. And the problem is most of the time we're looking outward, we're not looking inward. So I would always invite people to really think about that. You know, you want somebody to accept you fully as you are. Are you willing to accept them fully as they are? And what does that mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that means, and I talk about it and I reference Mark Nepo a lot because he's one of my teachers and he's been a mentor for a very long time. He talks about acceptance and us accepting the other fully as they are. All of who they are is fully welcome. And that's how we know the difference between ending a relationship or working on a relationship. If you feel that you are fully accepted, fully as you are, all the parts of yourself are welcome. There's no parts that they wish that they could change, then you know that this is a relationship worth fighting for. If there's you're having that, oh, I really love them. This situation that I'm currently living through with a family member. I really love that person. I just wish they were different. And it's like, okay, but then you don't really fully love them. No, I really do. I love them. I would do anything for them. I want them to be different. And it's like, okay, well, what about them exactly do you want them to? It's, oh, I wish they were more, I wish they cared more. And it's like, okay, well, you can't make somebody care for you. So do you then really fully accept this person? Because you're saying that you fully accept them, but there's this part of them that is not welcome. So do you fully accept them or not? And that's sort of the question that they have to grapple with at that point. They have to really examine their motives and how they really feel about a situation. I always have to ask myself that. See, I always put myself in the opposing person's shoes because I know I'm right, right? Like I know I'm always going to be right. I'm sure everybody here can feel that way. My point is always the right point. My point is always the most elevated point. My point is always the more evolved point. I'm always going to be right. So at that point, you're not giving anybody else's truth space. Even if it doesn't correlate with yours, it's true for them. So how do you show up then for that person? How do you show up in a meaningful way that will allow them to feel seen, heard, and understood? And so that's our problem most of the time. That's the issue that we have. I mean, I'm not saying that's the main issue in our society today, but I would say it's a big problem.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love that viewpoint as well. I remember that one of the yoga teacher trainings I went to, that's what they were telling us. They were like, okay, so you're in a really close space with 10 people over the next 2 weeks, and the person that triggers you the most is probably the person that you can learn the most from, because they trigger something in you that you are still working on within yourself. And so as you were talking about that family member, and you wish that family member maybe would care more, I think then you basically pull it back and ask yourself, it basically goes back then to that self-love, right? It's basically then the question, how can you care better for yourself?
Exactly. Yeah, you're proving my point.
Yeah. I think that's really, really powerful. And you were talking about spiritual mentors. How did you find your mentors as you were going through this process and journey of healing and loving yourself?
Yeah, I'm a stalker. I'm like an online stalker. And a lot of people that I started to follow. Well, my first teacher was like a teacher of my first yoga teacher. So that was like a natural transition. Of course, I wanted to go study with her teacher, her guru, so that was my first initial entrance into learning through Yoga Rupa Raj Striker. That was my like main yoga teacher. And after that, it was really just reading a lot of books, learning from spiritual teachers, and then, you know, just, I don't want to say stalking. That sounds so bad, but you know what I mean? I just did
I
my
know
due
what you mean.
diligence. I would sign up for workshops. I would read all of their books. I would do the practices. I would follow them and just try and learn as much as I could. And so, yeah, that was what began that process. What helped me create a personal relationship to these people was having a podcast. I mean, having a podcast was really great in terms of connecting with people. And I have to say, I always like calling myself out on this, that was really the main reason why I started the podcast. I just wanted an excuse to talk to all of these like incredible leaders and teachers in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, it's great that you're bringing it up, because that was my last question that I have for you today, because I was curious to learn more about your podcast. When did you start the podcast, and what do you talk about with people in the podcast?
Yeah, the name of the podcast is called Radically Loved, and I started the podcast in 2016. And the whole purpose behind the purpose behind the podcast was to have these spiritual conversations. I wanted to hear people's stories of adversity. I wanted to learn how they cultivate creativity. I wanted to learn about their methods of getting their message out into the world. And so it has evolved since, but in the beginning, that was the big incentive behind the Radically Loved podcast. Like, how do these people practice radical love, or how does radical love live in their lives?
And you've had some incredible podcast guests like Ariana Huffington, Elizabeth Gilbert, Deepak Chopra, and many others. But those were the three, obviously, that stood out to me, because they're so famous in our today's world. And who was your most favorite podcast guest? Like, who's someone that you still maybe think about, or maybe even go back to the episode and you listen to it sometimes when you need to hear what they were saying?
Man, oh God. So I'm at like almost 500 episodes right now.
Wow.
So there's a lot. And I do one weekly solo with my like director of operations / assistant / student / friend, Tessa, who works for me. And we do this weekly Wisdom Wednesday. And so, but including that, I mean, there's been a lot of people that I've had on the podcast there. I mean, I can think back right now. I'm just trying to think of the most recent ones, because there have been I've interviewed so many of my friends on there. Like, there's been so many incredible people. I think probably Jen Sincero, though. So Jen Sincero is the writer behind the You Are a Badass franchise. You are a badass at making money. You are a badass. You are a badass at breaking habits. Like, or you are a badass at, what's the habits one? Badass habits. I'm looking at my little library. But I've had Jen on the show several times. I would definitely consider her as like a mentor, somebody that I definitely look up to. And she's just like a real down-to-earth human being. And she's an incredibly gifted writer and very successful, obviously. But yeah, I mean, God, I've had so many people. I've interviewed Preeta Ji on the show as well. She's like a spiritual leader, teacher. So many. I can think of so many incredible people that I've had the privilege of talking to. And I mean, look, I want to advertise and say that every conversation I have is great. Every single person.
I think it is. I think you learn from everyone that you're interviewing, you know? Yeah. But I do still, as you are answering that question, I just thought about my own guests that I've had and that have like stood out to me. And I think it's usually the ones that you interview multiple times, because you get to know them better as well. And you've built that connection that sometimes you just don't have if you're just talking once. Very
For
cool.
sure. For sure.
Yeah, well, Rosie, this was really interesting. Thank you so much for talking to us today and for sharing your wisdom. I'm really, really excited to read the book and learn more about that self-love journey and the healing journey, because I think we are all on it, or we should at least all be on it. And I hope that, some of our listeners will get the book as well and dive into more of those different practices that they can do on a regular basis.
Thank you. Thanks, Julia. And thank you so much for your support and for having me on your show. And to all of your listeners, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. And anytime I get an opportunity to talk about the things that I love to teach is always such a privilege. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.